Hello, I'm State Representative Janine Nodder, and you're watching Chattin' with Janine Presents. The topic is the border crisis. It's a national security issue. My guests for this program have all been to the border, and I went with them, and I'm going to introduce them now. We have Representative Len Turcotte. Welcome, Len.
Thank you.
Chris Maidman of AFP Foundation, Americans for Prosperity Foundation. And then Representative Jordan Ullery, who sits behind me in the House. So you're from Hudson?
I'm from Hudson.
You're close by. And
Across
then
the
you're
river.
from,
Barrington Stratford.
and you from AFP, the office is in Manchester.
We have an
Yes.
office in Manchester and an office out in Portsmouth.
So Chris and I went to the border. Well, there was a group of about 10 of us that went at the end of May. And we saw a lot of the agricultural issue and the need for migrant workers. And we did see the border. Later on in the show, we're going to see pictures from that trip and also the one that we just took where we went down to McAllen, Texas. So it was two different trips. And I'm very curious just to see what your reaction was. I'm going to let you go first because you live close by.
It was a little bit eye-opening. Listening to the Customs Border Patrol and the Department of Public Safety, the two agencies that are involved heavily in patrolling the border and dealing with the true humanitarian crisis that's taking place there. It was astounding. One of the statistics that hit me hardest was when the colonel of the Texas State Police, DPS, got up and said within the last year there had been something like 34,000 arrests for criminal activity, of which some 20,000 were for human trafficking. That's modern day slavery. He also explained to us that you can see it when you watch news. If you see a young woman with a wristband on, that wristband is essentially a UPS code or a universal code that, like you scanning something in the grocery store, that will be color coded as to which cartel is running that woman, what product she's carrying, how much money she owes the cartel for her transit into the United States from wherever she's from, and then where she's going to go for work. And the work is normally not labor, and it's under the table, and it's a cash type work that you can't say that on polite television as to what she's going to be doing or is going to be done to her. The men, the same types of thing. It was horrendous, where men would be lined up for essentially labor slavery, and it was horrendous. We went to a farm, and which was near the border. It's a very, very, very old farm from the days of Texicans, and they're constantly finding dead people. They occasionally will find a young male who apparently didn't comply sufficient to the instructions of the coyotes, the traffickers. So they hung them, and it wasn't dropping them down and quick and neat like you see in the westerns. They just string them up, choke them to death. Women would be placed on display near a trail if they didn't comply fully. Then we find out that some of the aid agencies, including the United Nations, were providing these people with transit packets in the jungles of Central America that contained birth control items. And
you can find out more about that if you look up a podcast called Law and Border. It's Ben, I can't think of his last name, but Law and Border, as in border, the southern border. It's a podcast, and one of those clips is about that. He'll show you the pack and what's in it.
Yeah,
You tell these women you're going to get raped, but you can at least ask your attacker to put on a condom. And if that doesn't work, there's a morning after pill.
Yeah. That's disgusting. Thank you, Janine.
Would you like to go next?
Sure. I'd like to add one more item that Jordan was talking about, and that's on the human trafficking. They spoke about how some of the children are recycled over the border many times, because if you come across the border with a child, they let you in. And they mentioned one child had been recycled 17 times
Yep.
across the border. The thing I found most interesting about the trip was really had to do with the cartels, and pretty much everybody we heard from spoke about the cartels, and they had a little bit different take than I think the majority of people in our states think of how we think about them. They described the cartels as being more of a business rather than how we
Thugs.
think of them. You know what I mean? And they said they have the cartels who run their operations like a business, yet they have their enforcement wings of the cartels, if you will, where they actually have quasi-military operations. We saw videos and pictures. I don't know if you guys remember one video of a line of military-looking vehicles with 4 or 5 individuals standing beside each one.
Blouse pants.
Yep. They look just like a military, members of the Mexican military. They were actually the enforcement arms of some of these cartels. We also heard about the brutality of the cartels and the enforcers in Mexico. Not really going to speak a lot about that right now unless you want to get into that a little later. But I was really surprised at the influence of the cartels in the United States. They mentioned that they believe that the cartels have an operation pretty much in every metropolitan area, in our country. And the network they have, they get them across the border, and then they get talking about the getaways, the ones that don't show
yeah.
up, or the gotaways, the ones that don't show up at the processing centers, which I heard on the way over here today. They're now estimating the Border Patrol 1.5 million since January of 2021. And during one of the speeches, one of the presenters said, "Why do you think those gotaways don't come to the processing centers?" And I mentioned, well, probably because they're criminals. And they go, "That's exactly right." So you've got this huge criminal activity coming across the border, and then they move them into the states. They start with sending them to, say, San Antonio or Dallas to safe houses, and then they move on from there.
To send them here.
And here.
So that's what we learned when Chris and I were down at the border, because we met with the Border Patrol. And I'm going to bring Chris in, but I just wanted to say that when we were down in McAllen, Texas, we got to go on a Marine Patrol boat and down the Rio Grande, and we saw people on the other side. And
With guns.
yes, and one of the he had to be cartel. I mean, nobody goes on a jet ski in jeans, but he wanted us to know that he saw us. He wanted us to know that.
The gentleman that was on the boat, one of the Texas Rangers, actually said, "See those guys over there? They're watching us. They're part of the, part of the
so we
cartel."
passed by one of them. I had sunglasses on, but somehow our eyes met, and he watched me the whole time as that boat was going by. It was like really freaky. But this just came to mind. Just bear with me. When we were looking over into Mexico, it just was going through my mind, and I got chills. I was thinking, this is the land where Padre Pro lived. Padre Pro, P-R-O, was a Catholic priest in the 1920s when it was illegal to be Catholic, and he would put on disguises to go and bring the sacraments to his people. And he was arrested and executed, and they put him against a wall to face a firing squad, and he stretched out his arms, and his last words were "Viva Cristo Rey," which means "Long live Christ the King." So, and that's what I was thinking about when we were looking over to Mexico.
Well,
but
you looked across that border. Excuse me, Chris. You look when we were on the Rio Grande side, and we came back on the Rio Bravo side, and you looked at the houses over there. You'd see these palatial southwestern homes that were just some of them were very, very, very nice. And next to him is this hovel, and you try and figure out, okay, I know what that guy does for a living on the river. But river piracy has been around forever and a day.
So, Chris, when we went down to Yuma and we met with the Border Patrol, we weren't allowed to take pictures, but he showed us a chart of the different people that are coming across the border. It's not, I mean, most people might think, it's just because we're next to Mexico, it must be Mexicans coming in, but it's not.
No, it was pretty alarming. That was one of the most breathtaking things that I learned from Border Patrol while we were down there is that Mexico isn't even the top 10 countries of folks crossing in the Yuma sector. There's folks coming from Ukraine, from Russia, from Japan, from China, from all Europe, now Israel, Palestine, Pakistan, all those places. 93% of the folks that cross in Yuma sector weren't even from Mexico. So they're coming from more than 100 different countries. Mexico's not even in the top 10. So these folks are getting smuggled in. They're flying them into, Mexicali, and then getting them over the border. The other really alarming, you watch on Fox News or the different news stations, you see all these people just flooding over the border.
Tens of thousands.
And I think, the assumption that at least I had is that they just disappear into America. But an alarming, most of them just turn themselves over to Border Patrol. They just turn, they call them, what are the give-ups, right? So they cross the border and they say, we're here, take us into custody. And they get brought to the processing station. They get brought to the local nonprofit for health treatments, for medicine. They get a cell phone, they get a plane ticket, and they're off to...
And who's paying for that?
The taxpayers of the United States.
While our veterans are being pushed out of their homes.
Yep, and so these folks are getting flown into, cities all across the country, even here in New Hampshire. More than 14,000 estimated undocumented immigrants here in New Hampshire being housed all over the place in sponsor homes. So they cross the border illegally. They have somebody that says they'll sponsor them, and the nonprofits on the southern border just fly them to wherever they have a sponsor, because otherwise the southern states would all be swamped with them. The big picture that I learned is that we have a perverse incentive structure set up, where we make it really easy to come here illegally, and we make it really hard to come here legally, to do it the right way. If you want to come here the right way, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of patience. And that's especially true of the agriculture industry, and we saw that firsthand in Yuma. The farmers in Yuma depend on legal migrants and legal immigrants for their harvest. Nearly all of the lettuce in the United States comes from Yuma in the months of October to April.
That's the salad bowl.
It's the salad bowl of America, which I didn't know that lettuce grew there. I thought it was just a desert, but I learned that while I was there, right? But oftentimes to get these legal migrants, the H-1A workers, the farmers have to jump through hoops. It costs them a ton of money. The migrant workers have to jump through a ton of hoops. It costs them a ton of time and a ton of money. The Mexican government isn't always as efficient as possible getting those processed, so they're late for harvest season. We lose crops that way. And the illegal migrants, the ones crossing and waiting for Border Patrol, they have to use the restroom, and they end up going in the lettuce fields, and then that whole crop is destroyed. So the legal, illegal, they go hand in hand. And if we're incentivizing coming here illegally instead of incentivizing coming here legally by making it so much easier to come here illegally.
Right. I remember one of the farmers saying that they're skilled workers and they're so needed, and he talked about how they can pick up like a head of cauliflower and wield that knife so fast and so accurately without cutting off their fingers, and he just doesn't know how they could do that.
Growing up in northern Indiana, the migrant workers would come up, and back in the 50s and 60s, we had them all the time. There was we knew the families because it would be the same family every year, would follow a circuit, would follow up. They'd do the beans, they'd do the peas, they'd do the fruits. Southern Maine or southern Michigan and northern Indiana at the different farms, different orchards, and then they would go back home and then come back up again. And it was a family structure. It was a family unit. It was some of the vehicles they had were very, very nice. So the caravans, if you will, to use the English term, the mobile homes that they were living in, while they just did a circuit. And yes, migrant workers, and use the term that Bush made, do the jobs Americans wouldn't do or don't want to do. That's not necessarily true. They were doing a job that they knew how to do. And they took the agricultural skills they had here and have helped make Mexico one of the largest producers of produce in the world. Because of the skills they learned here, they took them home. And some established their own farms. Some have migrant workers as well. That is a incentivized, good immigration system. But when you as Chris said, make it easy for the bad guys to do bad stuff, bad guys are going to do bad stuff.
Not only do we incentivize the bad guys, but we incentivize some of the maybe the good ones crossing. Coming home from our trip, you might have seen it, but I stopped in Chicago. Chris was mentioning how they cross the border. They give them cell phones, they give them gift cards, and they give them a plane ticket. I stayed over in Chicago that night, and when I got in, I went to the transportation center, and I used to be based in Chicago, so I've seen it many, many times, and I looked, and the entire inside was just filled with hundreds, majority Hispanic, individuals laying out on the floor with cell phones and whatever. I took a picture and I put it on my Facebook. The next day, USA Today actually had done an article where they did a much better picture than I did, and it showed literally hundreds of these illegal immigrants who had been flown into Chicago, and now they were using part of the terminal, as housing for these individuals.
Yeah. And when we get down to the crux of it, we had retired Border Chief Chris Clem from the Yuma sector up a couple weeks ago here in New Hampshire, talking to Granite Staters about his experience, 27 and a half years with Border Patrol, and he said his entire career, every single administration made progress towards securing the border. Every single administration made progress except for this one. Mm-hmm. And this one, on day one, stopped all progress and reverted. They went backwards, intentionally went backwards. Under the Trump administration, we were securing the border by using a wall, and that includes a physical wall, but it also includes smart infrastructure, cameras, detectors. A wall isn't feasible along the entire border. There's river, there's mountains, but where a wall was feasible, they were building a wall, and where it wasn't, they were using technology and infrastructure and personnel. It's a multi-pronged approach to secure the border. And every single administration was making progress right up until we got to this one, and they put an end to it. And what we're seeing now is record numbers of illegal crossings, record number of apprehensions, record number of drugs coming across the border, record number of the smuggling that you guys saw in Texas. And this administration has chosen to turn a blind eye, to look the other way, to leave the border unsecure. Until very recently, last week, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas said that all of a sudden there's this big crisis and we need to build a wall. But they let the quote unquote Trump wall sit there unbuilt. The materials were there, the contracts were in place.
We saw the materials laying on the ground.
Pallets and pallets and pallets of not only fencing but technology, cameras, sensors, the whole 9 yards just sitting there. And, out in the weather, unused.
So we were down in Texas with legislators and sheriffs from 28 states, and they said the same thing. That day, they said the exact dates, and that day everything just went to. And I'm wondering.
Every sheriff that spoke, every Border Patrol agent that spoke, the farm ranch we visited, everybody said the problem began in January of 2021. Everyone.
That's when people started dying in public, right, literally on their doorsteps. Mm-hmm. And where you reminded me what the CBP regional director, was talking about. He said, our focus is not to keep people out, but it's to let them come in a safe manner.
And they
that
need to
hasn't
be
been done.
vetted because we don't know who's
legally,
coming across.
Right.
So I know we said the last 10 minutes, but I'm thinking we should probably go through the pictures now. And also, there was a press conference there, and there was sheriffs that spoke. There was a senator from West Virginia, and then I was
somebody from Connecticut. I think it was a senator from Connecticut as well.
Oh, okay, yes, I know him, Eric.
Yeah, we had breakfast with him. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So should we run through? Okay, this is the Texas trip. There's Jordan and Len and I. We were listening to, looks like a sheriff that was speaking there.
No, that's the director of the public safety, Department of Public Safety.
That's right, because the sheriffs are all wearing cowboy hats.
Oh yeah, they're over in the background.
Okay, this comes at the end of the press conference. So obviously we didn't put this together because it would say Granite Staters.
Yep. We're not New Hampshireites. We're Granite Staters.
So, and this will be mentioned later, so we can pass by this one. Oh, there they are. There's the sheriffs, and that one second from the left, when he had the mic in front of him, boy, he looked just like George Strait.
Yeah, well,
And there we are with them.
the guy with the suit coat also had
And that's Eric.
blue
that's,
jeans
that's
on.
the Connecticut guy, the Connecticut senator.
Yeah.
Here we are in a bus on our way to ranch. There we are at the ranch. That's the man who owned the ranch, and there's a border patrol. He also talked about, and he lives down there. He grew up there. He talked about finding bodies and how hard that is.
And it was interesting. Most of the border patrol grew up in the area and were Hispanic in heritage.
Yes, they were. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's our fun ride on the ATV where we got blasted by every weed we went over, and we ended up wearing it. I don't know why I thought sitting in the front would be a good idea. That's just before we got on the boats, the Marine Patrol on the Rio Grande. There's the boats without us standing in front of them. Oh, that's when my boat was going out. So that's where I was right up in there, that guy.
Note that the guy is wearing a balaclava, but that's not because he's trying to hide his identity. That's because they're on the water so much and reflecting it, and they burn their chins and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, see that I circled a green raft. Those are all along the river, on both sides of the river. See, the people don't actually swim across the Rio Grande. They use those rafts because they don't do sewage treatment. They just dump. So nobody wants to go in that water. They use the rafts. Okay, so this is a private wall, and I remember getting an email about this, that they were seeking donations to build this private wall. And I thought maybe I contributed. I don't know, I may have, so I might own a piece of that. That's taken from the boat.
You might want to, yes.
Oh, yeah, you wanted to see this all, right?
Having a little bit of difficulty stepping back into the boat because of a game leg, I noticed some marks on the shield and asked the trooper why there were marks there. Because earlier in the day they had been involved in a drug interdiction, and fire was exchanged on both sides.
Wow,
But I was really early in the morning.
before we got there.
We weren't there until midday, so it was several hours earlier.
Beware of alligators. Another reason not to swim the Rio Grande. Oh, gee, they're hauling me away. I think Jordan took that.
Yeah.
picture. Okay, this is from the May trip. Chris, you're not in this one, but those are all representatives.
Better off that I wasn't in it, believe me.
So Scott Wallace is right in the middle. He owns a business. Well, he still owns the building, but he had a business here in Merrimack. And on the end, because he's so tall, we renamed him Jose Grande. So I think we need to get him a new badge that says that. So there we saw at the end of May that the border had a big wide open. There's no gate. It's just wide open, and those are our people walking right over into Mexico.
And just not far from the gate here that's open, the wall was just unfinished.
Right.
They had just
the
stopped
materials
construction.
on the ground, and they're not going to use them.
Yeah.
A waste of money. Oh, okay, now this is shocking, and this made me gasp. So we're going to pause here for a moment. All right, we're looking at, and we saw this on the bus we went by, we saw this road with the two fences. It ends at the river. Now that man that's walking away, on the video, we saw him come up on his motorcycle, take out a package, set it down right there, that little spot there, and got on his motorcycle and went away. Thank God there was a Border Patrol agent nearby who came because that package moved and a baby stood up. And I gasped. I don't know where you were sitting in the room, but Greg Moore heard me. And I'm like, oh, and I kept asking about the baby. And Greg Moore, who's your boss for Americans for Prosperity, said, Janine, you don't get it. It's not just this kid. This happens every day. Mm-hmm. Every day they come and they dump packages. And the Border Patrol saved this child, but look, it was a baby. Couldn't have been, I don't even know if the baby was 2 years old. But he could have fallen in that river and died.
Walking back toward the river, but the
Yes.
Border Patrol came like 30 seconds after this
And
scooped
saved
him
him.
right up.
And we got to see well, we couldn't see the Obama cages, but you know, I always say they're Trump cages, but I'm sorry, that's not true. And Obama put those cages up to put the people in, and they wouldn't let us see them, but we saw the tents over the fence. And I was assured that they are cared for. Oh, this just came up on a Facebook memory. It says, defending the border is not a political option. It is a constitutional obligation. And I was like, oh, nice. And that's the word that I used in the press conference. I said it's an obligation.
Well, you don't have a country
Yeah.
if you don't defend the border.
Exactly. So should we just go right into that press conference then and then pick up the conversation after that?
You covered quite a few things in that.
Okay, all right, let's play that then.
Our next speaker is Representative Janine Nodder from New Hampshire.
It is the obligation of the United States government to protect our citizens and secure our border. Since the Biden administration took power, the border has been left wide open and our Border Patrol is swamped with processing people instead of doing the job that they are supposed to do, which is to protect the border. The border crisis touches all of us. Recently, up in Rye, New Hampshire, a murderer was captured. He was an illegal alien who, for a time, was living in the very town that I represent, Merrimack, New Hampshire. For every one illegal that the Border Patrol catches, 100 more get away. The gotaways are unvetted, their intentions unknown. I realize that some illegals are coming here to work. Others are not. Some are carrying in drugs. Some are guilty of sex trafficking. Some could be terrorists. Having open borders with no vetting of those who cross into our country is completely irresponsible and criminal. Drug abuse is a huge problem way up north in New Hampshire. We have one of the worst fentanyl problems in the country. The border crisis is not a California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas problem. It is a national security crisis. Drugs are coming up from the southern border and are carried into New Hampshire from the sanctuary state of Massachusetts. Why is the federal government allowing this to happen? Why are states allowing sanctuary policies that protect drug and sex traffickers? We have sanctuary policies in New Hampshire. For several terms now, I have sponsored or co-sponsored legislation to ban sanctuary cities. We can't pass the bill because every single Democrat votes against it. If they aren't concerned about the drug problem or the destitute ones who are trapped in the sex trade, then they probably are also unconcerned about the fiscal burden of illegal immigration on the state of New Hampshire. An estimated 14,000 illegal aliens live in New Hampshire. There are roughly 5,000 US-born children do too. Illegal alien households add 4,896 students to local schools. The average cost to New Hampshire, to Granite Staters, is $5,659 per illegal alien. What are the taxpayers supporting? Education is $73.7 million. Police, legal, and corrections is $9.5 million. Plus there's health care, public assistance, and general government expenses, government service expenses. Illegal immigration cost New Hampshire taxpayers $107.5 million in 2023. The bottom line is it is affecting all of us. It is affecting the Granite State. It's affecting all of us, and it needs to stop. Thank you.
One of the things we have barely even touched on that we heard a lot about was the fentanyl. When we were in the Vickers Ranch the night we went up there, the sheriff from Brooks County was talking about, of course-
Martinez.
what's that?
Martinez.
Yes,
Sheriff Martinez.
Sheriff Martinez was talking about just outside the ranch was the Falfuria checkpoint where
Oh, yeah.
3.2 million individuals are checked annually, biggest checkpoint in the country. But he spoke about a lot of the illegals they found, the human trafficking and that. But the one statistic that stuck out with me was 12 to 13 years ago, I forget the exact day or date, he said they had confiscated 7 pounds of fentanyl 12 or 13 years ago. In this past year, they confiscated over 20,000 pounds of fentanyl just at that one checkpoint. I found the Falfuria checkpoint very interesting because the sheriff spoke that it's really the only road that goes between McAllen and San Antonio, and it's the main trafficking point to get illegals and fentanyl up through there. I don't know if you guys remember him talking about one individual they pulled over. He was pulling a couple of jet skis,
Yeah.
and the dogs smelt the humans in the jet
yes.
skis, and they
Yeah.
actually lifted up the seats, and there was an illegal in each jet ski under the seats. But the fentanyl that's coming into this country is just unbelievable.
And we have one of the worst problems in West Virginia is another state.
Yep.
And then, when you knock on doors and I talk to people, the drug problem comes up, and it's like, and it needs to start by securing the borders. If we're ever gonna win this war
Yep.
on drugs, it's huge. It's a huge problem. We had one of my son's first best friend. He died on Thanksgiving Day of fentanyl overdose. So for his family, his mother is never going to be able to forget the image of her son lying dead that Thanksgiving morning. And how can they ever enjoy that holiday again?
Well, even up here in New Hampshire, write about it in the Union Leader, seen it on, well, not seen it, but you've heard it reported on the radio and television of a police officer, an EMS person. It only takes, 2 micrograms
Right.
to kill.
Very little. It's poison.
And we're talking tons of this product coming up and being mixed. Yes, it has a medical application, but that's under medical supervision. It's not being mixed with whatever to increase
And
the
medical
size
grade,
of.
and it's probably.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
a
want
little
to
bit
use
different.
the word pure, but
And where does the fentanyl come from? Well, it comes from Mexico, but the raw product comes from Asia. Then it's assembled in Mexico, and then it's sent over. One thing we heard over and over from the DPS and from the CBP was Mexico does not have control over its own borders. Mexico is becoming a narco-terrorist state. They showed us pictures of prosecutors that this cartel or that cartel didn't like. They showed us pictures of inter-cartel warfare that came from the Drug Enforcement Agency operations. You think the technicals that you see on television in Iraq and Afghanistan and now in the Gaza Strip were fancy. The material they were showing there was as good as something that you could get, from BAE shop. Armored turrets, machine guns, and even heavier caliber weaponry.
And
So, go ahead.
Don't forget, I don't remember his last name. Jason. He was one of Jason Jones.
Yes.
He was the one that was showing us a lot about the cartels. I don't know if you remember, throughout his entire presentation, he kept giving us examples of what's going on south of the border. And remember, he kept saying, as long as it doesn't happen in the U.S.,
Yes.
we're okay, right? He kept saying that after each one. And then he went and he actually showed us some examples of what's happening on our own side.
Yeah.
The one that struck me is he talked about a former attorney for the cartels down in Mexico who had escaped, and they said the cartel spent over $1 million to track him down, and he was executed in front of his house in his car with his wife and kid in the car in South Lake, Texas. Now, anybody who knows South Lake, Texas, it's just outside the airport in Dallas-Fort Worth, one of the most wealthiest communities in that area. They tracked him down, shot him right in front of his house. So all those the cartel stuff that's happening mainly below the border is making its way into the U.S.
And we learned in Yuma that the cartel will buy houses on the American side, and that they'll use it as waypoints just over the border. And it's really hard for Border Patrol to detect who owns it. You know, it's just somebody buys a house and on legal means, presumably. They're using illegal funds, but they're buying the house legally as a waypoint. So they just hop over the border or under it. Sometimes they'll dig tunnels under a walled section or where it's
San
heavily
Diego.
patrolled. The Yuma Border Patrol showed us a few pictures of detected tunnels. Some
one
are
came
more,
up in a KFC.
into a closed KFC. That's right. And but when we talk about securing the border, that's really the first step, right? But there's a second part to that, and that helps both sides of this. Is if we secure the border, but like we have wide gates, so that we are incentivizing coming here legally. And we're stopping the drug cartels, we're stopping the fentanyl, we're stopping the human trafficking, but we're letting those folks over that want to immigrate to the United States in a legal manner, that want the migrant workers that work the fields that we need, or the crops will be lost. We use plenty right here in New Hampshire. The Lowell Farm in Hollis, Fulcino's. I'm not sure if he uses the migrant workforce, but we have a lot of agriculture here in New Hampshire that depends on it, and then we also have a tourist industry closer to the seacoast and up in the mountains that also depends on, especially this time of year. Those are the H2As and the H2Bs. And so we depend, our country really has depended on immigration for almost our entire existence. But we always knew who was coming here. It was always legally. We need, if we secure both, not only the southern border, but the northern border, because now they're flying them to
Yes.
Canada, and they're coming across our border with Canada. Remote wilderness, they're just walking through the woods. If we secure the borders and make it easier for people to come here legally, this solves a lot of the problems.
Amen.
That was, they discussed the northern border as being an issue because one of the points, thank you for jogging my
Reminding me.
memory, was that they go due north. Due north from McAllen brings you into Alberta. Get on a train in Canada, go across over to Montreal or Quebec City, and come right down either through Calais or through Pittsburgh.
So while we were down in McAllen, everyone who spoke, the sheriffs, they all pinned this whole problem on the Biden administration. And like you said before, every president has made some progress, and it all went away in January and with Biden, when Biden took power. And it's unsustainable.
The sheriff in Maryland, near the Maryland-West
I
Virginia
sat with him
border.
on the plane on the way back.
Yes, he gave a very, on the full press conference, gave a very moving discussion. He had a young deputy. She was a mother of two, I believe, and her response was to stop a car that was driving all over the place. He called it a DUI stop. I don't know how, but she stopped it. She walked up to the car, and she was dead. You shot her just shot her with no regard for her life whatsoever. And that, that's not that far away. That's only 500, 600 miles away.
I had the card for the sheriff.
We had
in Maryland, I can't
the
find it.
representative from Pennsylvania, who was surprised at that activities in her state, northern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, one of the points Chief Clem made when he was in New Hampshire is, if the border isn't secure, every state is a border state. And, we can sit here, and I think a lot of the blame does fall to the Biden administration. But if we look at the past 20, 23 years, as long as I've been paying attention to politics, at least a little bit, right? The real problem, or one of the main problems, is that Congress has failed to do their job, and the president has, presidents have been forced to do this within executive power, following the executive powers that they have. President Trump did it his way. President Obama had more deportations than President Trump, believe it or not. President Bush, he did what he could to secure the border, but Congress really has been sitting on their hands for decades on this problem. We got DACA, I believe, was an executive order. It's been litigated in the courts ever since. They've tried to do executive orders here and there and try to piece these things together. But Congress, it's within their purview. It's their responsibility to pass a comprehensive border security and immigration bill, and really, find some bipartisan or nonpartisan consensus to put this problem to bed, and to fix the problem in law, so that the presidents, we don't have to depend on, okay, well, if we get President Biden again, or
whims
if
of
we
this president or that
exactly,
one.
exactly,
Yeah.
and
Can
if
you
Congress sets this in stone, then the president will have to implement the law.
Could you just remind us what DACA stands for?
You don't remember?
It's Dreamers.
It's the Dreamers program.
Yeah.
It
Anybody?
dealt with illegal immigrant children who were brought here when they were very young through no fault of their own. And President Obama's plan was to give them legal status so that they could get the weight off of their shoulders, and they could become Americans and fulfill the American dream and get their education and their jobs without worrying about being deported back to a country that they never really knew, because they were brought here when they're 2 or 3 or 18 months old. They never knew their home country. They never knew. They were brought here through no fault of their own. So Obama's plan was to give them a quasi-citizenship status so that they could get jobs and go to school without having to worry about Border Patrol showing up to haul them back to wherever they came from.
So I'm sure you've all seen the pictures of the tens of thousands of people crossing the border every day, the unvetted ones just crossing the border. Well, one of the presenters down in McAllen, I think it was the law and border guy, he took his camera and to see where they're coming from. He went over the other side of the river and followed them. He went up the river, he passed 116 boats, and he was yelling, "Hey, where are you from? Where are you from?" And they were all different countries,
And they weren't all Hispanic.
No, some were all over the world.
Don't forget about the gentleman who had the video and the pictures on the Darien Gap. It was the same one that you were talking about at the beginning of the show here. He was filmed down on the Colombia-Panama border, is where the Darien Gap is, and there were no Hispanics that he was filming as they were walking through. I don't know if you remember. As
I remember
they were
all the
walking
trash.
through, all
There's
the trash.
everywhere.
But as he was walking through and filming, he would do the same thing. Hey, where are you from? China. Hey, where are you from? A Middle Eastern country. Where are you from? Africa. I mean, there were no Hispanics. It's a big trade. They fly them into Colombia, walk them across into Panama, and then they make their way up. Another point I wrote down was, who are they? One of the presenters spoke to the fact that all these people who show up at the border crossings and turn themselves in, he said they are who they say they are. And everybody went, what do you mean? They don't have any identification. So if they say they are Jose Gonzalez, from that point on they're Jose Gonzalez, because they have no identification. So most of these people that are coming in the country, we have no idea.
To that point, Len, when we visited the wall in Yuma, we found licenses. They come over the border, they ditch them, then they give themselves up to Border Patrol, and like you said, they are who they say they are.
So we also learned in Yuma that the Border Patrol spends 80% of their time processing people, and only 20% actually guarding the border. And I asked the Border Patrol down in Yuma, I said, what's the hardest part of your job? And he got very emotional, and he said, it's the kids. It's the human factor. They find these kids wearing nothing but a T-shirt. And we heard that too, wearing nothing but a T-shirt that has a phone number on it.
Well, they showed the picture at the Darien Gap of that young pregnant woman that was
dead.
just laying on a sandbar. It was a gross picture. How she died? Well, You could
Well,
see
it's
her underpants
hot.
were tied to her
It's-
legs.
yeah.
So
It's so hot down there too, and they're crossing the desert, and they go through ranches, and every time a truck plows through the fence of a rancher, it's $6,000-7,000 to fix it, and
Oh,
that's on
we-
them.
there was a group that told us about the exotic farm and exotic
Animals.
rescue farm that had the fences, plural, had been breached.
multiple times.
And the people that were doing the breaching didn't realize they were food for the exotic animals.
Oh, geez. I also asked, I said, what do they do for water? I mean, it's hot. It's very, very hot. Well, they sometimes break the pipes, so tens of thousands of gallons of water is being wasted until somebody notices and fixes it. Oh. I don't know, guys. We have 10 minutes left. Go ahead.
Another thing Chris mentioned before about the cartels buying houses across the border. I was speaking with one of the gents from Oklahoma on the bus ride home from the river tour, and he said what's happening in Oklahoma City. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but a good 10% of the people that were there with us
Oklahoma,
on this trip
yes.
were all Oklahoma, because they're having such a huge problem. Oklahoma City is a big focal point. And he says what's happened up there is a lot of the cartels have actually come in and bought a lot of the dispensaries because they legalized marijuana up there. And the cartels now have moved in and bought
course.
the dispensaries. Not only are they buying houses, they're buying up
Well,
the
that was that.
dispensaries.
They said that the level of marijuana importation, trafficking across the border has dropped off to almost
Exactly.
nothing.
Yep.
Because it is. It's cheaper to have it here.
Yep.
If we have regulated sales appropriately, then the quality of the material being sold is going to be regulated to the point that you don't have fentanyl lace joints and fentanyl lace gummies, etc. That's an argument that's ongoing at the State House, which unfortunately
In
I'm part of.
perpetuity.
But
You should run for state rep, Chris, and join us.
but it's
Maybe.
you know, the barrels or bags of bundles of marijuana, just it's too bulky. But how many pounds of marijuana can you, or cocaine, heroin, fentanyl can you get inside of a jet ski? A lot more than you can get in a bale of pot.
The other thing they talked about, somebody mentioned it before, about the drugs coming from China mostly,
Or the,
and it goes over to Mexico. They're also sending over what they call the pill presses. They send the pieces of for the pill presses. They assemble them in Mexico, and then they make the pills in all these nice, bright, shiny little colored
Yeah.
that make them
little
look like
children.
candy, so
Candies.
we know who
and the
their
company,
target is.
what they also said was that the company that makes the pill presses for the illegal drugs knows how to make them because they're making the pill presses for the legal drugs. And it's the same press, the same logos, the same coating. So how do you know
Yeah, how
which
do
drug
you
is
know?
which?
Wow, that's really scary. And we have these sanctuary cities, and they're protected there. Drug dealers, sex traffickers are protected in these cities.
I mean, that's one of the biggest problems. From what I've seen is if you get caught for a crime, the prosecutor's job is to prosecute you. The jury's job is to judge your innocence or your guilt, and then the judge is supposed to sentence you to a just and proper sentence. But in a lot of these cities that are run by the opposite of law and order, I guess you could say, prosecutors, they're decriminalizing real crimes with victims. Shoplifting, vandalism, public defecation and
Carjacking.
urination, assaults. A lot of these crimes have been quote unquote decriminalized by these various prosecutors or states or cities even. And what you get from that is people that are committing these crimes that have victims. There's real people that are being victimized by these crimes, and so we're not even dealing with the crime problem that we have in our country. And then we have folks, and I'm sure who knows who these people are that are committing the crimes? Some of them could be citizens. Some of them could be, illegals that should be deported. Because when we allow migrants and immigrants into our country, we expect them to follow our rule of law. We expect them to become acclimated and to become Americans. And if we're not enforcing our rules and our laws here in the country, then what are they getting acclimated to? What kind of country are they becoming a part of? They're becoming you see it all over the country. The crimes, and a lot of them, to be fair, are citizens. But if that's the kind of system that we're presenting, then that's the kind of system that these immigrants will be acclimated to. And I can leave you to decide for yourself if that's the kind of country you want, but.
Right. So how long can our country survive with no borders? That's the question.
Well, kind of expounding on what Chris just said, I think a lot of, based on the last 36 years that I've traveled the world frequently, I can tell you I've seen what's happening here, I've seen already happen in Europe. Europe, 30, 35 years ago, most of the countries were pristine. They started having large migrant influxes. And over those, I know it takes a long time, so it's hard for people to see it, but I've seen those countries, France, Spain, Germany, Switzerland, that was once one of the most pristine countries in the world.
Yeah.
They're all now inundated. And the thing that always shows me where they're at is the level of graffiti. I know it sounds minor, but the level is over there is just unbelievable. And every country has gone downhill now.
Yeah, well,
and now I'm seeing
yeah.
that happen, unfortunately, to our country. Drive around Manchester. 5 years ago, did you ever see graffiti anywhere? Now it's on the bridge abutments, it's on
I
the
know. Well, they're
fences.
widening Everett Turnpike right now in Merrimack, and they were discussing putting up a sound wall. And I'm like, yeah, if you do that, it's going to be full of graffiti. That's what happened in Bedford.
That's right. And what happens is, unfortunately, the majority of these migrants, illegal immigrants, who are coming here are not coming from countries, as Chris was trying to say, they don't come and assimilate. They're coming from mostly third world countries that don't know how the U.S. has been. And they
not
bring
one of them are worried about the climate.
a whole different issue, but I think
know.
you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, we expect, when migrants come here, we want them to assimilate, to pursue the American dream,
Correct.
And to provide opportunities that they didn't have in their home country, and that's not what we're rolling out for them.
Right.
And to your question, I won't speculate over how long we can last. What I'm hopeful for is that our elected officials in Washington, in New Hampshire, will enact sound policies that secure the border, deter illegal immigration, allow legal migrants to come here more easily, but so we can vet them, so we can fulfill we have how many open jobs in New Hampshire right now? 1.7% unemployment, 1.8% unemployment. Employers are struggling really to find employees everywhere. Of course we have a lack of housing. That's a different story, but my hope is that we enact sensible policies that secure the border, allow legal migration that's vetted and legal and easy to come here if you're entitled to based on merit, not based on diversity statistics. Or we want merit-based immigration for the farmers, for the agriculture, for employers, high skilled, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. That's my hope, is that we have these sensible policies.
I wanted to read you this text. So on the way home, it took 3 planes to get home. So I took one plane, got off in Dallas, and stayed the night with family. And I got this, I sent the what was that, press conference to my niece and her husband, and he writes back, they call me Aunt Jeannie. After Aunt Jeannie's visit to the border, President Biden just instructed, what's his name, Mayorkas?
Mayorkas.
To waive red tape and immediately start construction of 20 miles of border wall in Texas. Biden does not want Aunt Jeannie to come back. Great news for Texas. Leonie laughed all.
Yeah, a little bit of laughter at the end, and an exceptionally serious topic. Thank you, Jen, for this, and hopefully we can have people that both at the state level and at the federal level, that are more interested in doing what's right than what's good for party or power.
Well, I know that the drug issue is a huge issue, and it affects people right here in Merrimack. And the sex trafficking is out there, but it's protected, and we just not. I know it's out there, and we need to stop that as well. So thank you, Representative Ullery, Representative Turcotte, and Chris Maidment.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us, Janine.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you,
Thank you.
and thank you for watching.